The fork scraping against ceramic was the only sound Elena Rodriguez wanted to hear, but the shadow falling across her table had other plans. In exactly 47 seconds, 5 men would learn why you should never mistake silence for weakness, or a woman eating alone for an easy target. Drake Sullivan's boots announced his arrival before his voice did, each step deliberate as he approached the corner booth where Elena sat. The leather of his vest creaked as he leaned forward, both palms flat on the table's surface. The impact sent ripples through her water glass. "This seat's reserved," he said, though Elena had been sitting there for 20 minutes. She didn't acknowledge him immediately. Her knife continued its work, dividing the pot roast into uniform pieces with the kind of precision that spoke to deeper habits. The military jacket draped over her shoulders showed signs of wear, patches faded, but still visible to anyone who knew what they meant. Betty's roadside cafe had fallen into that particular silence that accompanies potential violence. Conversations died mid-sentence. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. Even the kitchen sounds seemed to fade as every patron's attention fixed on the woman in the corner and the man who had decided she didn't belong there. When Eleanor finally raised her eyes, they held the kind of calm that makes predators reconsider their prey. She set down her utensils with deliberate care, hands folding in her lap with practiced ease. "I didn't see a sign," she said quietly. Drake's laugh carried no humor, only the confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences. Behind him, 4 more members of the Iron Serpent's motorcycle club spread through the diner's interior, positioning themselves with the ease of men who had done this before. Crusher, all 300 pounds of him, blocked the main entrance. Axel and Snake flanked the emergency exit. Ghost positioned himself near the kitchen doors, cutting off the only remaining escape route. "Sign says this whole town belongs to people who understand respect," Drake continued, his eyes tracking the patches on Elena's jacket. "That military costume you're wearing, where'd you buy it? Some surplus store, internet." The accusation rippled through the assembled diners. Stolen valor represented a particular kind of disrespect that even civilians recognized as crossing a line. Elena could feel the shift in atmosphere, judgment replacing curiosity, as strangers began reassessing her character based on a bully's accusations. "The jacket was issued to me at Paris Island in 2017, Elena replied, her tone conversational despite the tension. "Every patch represents deployments I served overseas. If you have concerns about authenticity, I can provide my service number." She reached into her jacket's inner pocket, the movement smooth and unhurried. Drake's crew tensed instinctively, hands drifting toward concealed weapons they assumed she couldn't match. What emerged was a worn wallet containing military identification that bore all the markers of genuine government issue. "Captain Elena Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps," she said, sliding the card across the table's surface. "Would you like to verify my credentials, or can I finish my dinner?" Drake snatched the identification, studying it with the focused attention of someone looking for any excuse to continue his harassment. The holographic seals and embedded security features marked it as authentic, but admitting that would represent an unacceptable loss of face. "Could be fake," he muttered, though conviction had left his voice. "Technology these days, anyone can make anything look real." "Could be," Eleanor agreed mildly, "but it isn't." From a booth near the window, General Robert Chambers had been observing the confrontation with growing concern. At 74 years old, he had seen enough genuine warriors to recognize one when circumstances forced her hand. The way Eleanor sat, maintaining awareness of exits and potential threats while appearing relaxed, spoke to training that went far beyond weekend warrior fantasies. Chambers pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly, his message brief but urgent. The recipient worked at the Pentagon, someone with access to records that would clarify exactly who these fools were threatening. Drake had decided that backing down would damage his reputation beyond repair. He tossed the identification card back onto the table with manufactured contempt. "Real or fake doesn't matter," he announced. "What matters is understanding how things work in this territory. We're the Iron Serpents. We provide security for local businesses, make sure nothing bad happens to people who show proper appreciation. Betty here." He gestured toward the cafe's owner, who had emerged from the kitchen with trembling hands. "She understands the value of our protection." The euphemism barely concealed the naked extortion underneath. Betty Crawford's fear was palpable as she moved between tables, refilling coffee with mechanical movements while avoiding eye contact with anyone who might expect her to acknowledge the truth. "Your protection racket sounds very efficient," Elena observed neutrally. "It is. But we've been hearing about someone new in the area, someone who doesn't understand local customs yet." Drake's eyes narrowed as he studied her face for any reaction. "Someone who thinks military service makes them special, gives them the right to ignore community standards." "I ordered food. I'm eating quietly, and I plan to pay my bill before leaving," Elena replied. "Which specific behavior violates your standards?" The response forced Drake to either make increasingly specific accusations or admit his objections were arbitrary. He chose escalation instead. "Your attitude's the problem. Military people get confused when they leave the service. Start thinking civilian rules don't apply to them. Start believing their own hype about being warriors." The insult was calculated to provoke anger, giving him justification for whatever violence he had planned. "My service record speaks for itself," Elena said calmly. "I don't need to justify my experience to someone whose primary contribution appears to be extorting restaurant owners." Drake's face darkened as he realized his manipulation had not only failed, but been turned against him. Around the cafe, other patrons watched with growing fascination as the expected script took an unexpected turn. "Smart mouth gets people in trouble they can't talk their way out of," he said, abandoning subtlety entirely. "We've been asking around about you. Word is you've been staying at the Gateway Motel for 3 weeks, paying cash, no visitors. That tells us you're either running from something or hiding something. People without local connections sometimes disappear, and nobody knows enough to miss them." The threat was no longer veiled. General Chambers' phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen, and his weathered face went pale as he read the response to his earlier inquiry. "You mentioned asking around," Elena said. "What exactly did you learn?" "Enough. Learned you don't have local employment, family, or any reason to be here except hiding." Drake signaled his crew, and they began closing in, forming a loose circle around her booth. "Learned something else, too. Manager at the motel says you wake up screaming most nights around 2 in the morning. Says you're disturbing other guests, creating problems." The revelation about her PTSD hit harder than any physical blow, though Eleanor's expression remained neutral. Post-traumatic stress represented a vulnerability that could be exploited by anyone with sufficient cruelty. "PTSD is a real problem," Drake continued with false sympathy, "especially for female veterans who saw action they weren't equipped to handle. Military puts women in combat roles these days, pretends they're just as capable. But biology is biology. The attack combined misogyny with amateur psychology, designed to maximize impact. Around them, the tension had become almost physical, pressing down like atmospheric pressure before a violent storm. "Here's what's going to happen," Drake announced. "You're going to finish your dinner, pay your bill, and walk outside with us for a private conversation about community standards. We're going to reach an understanding, and then everyone goes home happy." The euphemism was transparent. Private conversation meant isolated location. Everyone goes home. Happy meant Elena might not go home at all. "I'll have to decline that invitation," Elena said without looking up from her plate. "Wasn't really a request. Wasn't going to change my answer." From across the cafe, General Chambers suddenly stood up, his movement sharp enough to draw every eye. His face had gone completely white as he stared at his phone screen. "Sweet, merciful God," he whispered, his voice carrying in the silence. "Boys, you have absolutely no idea who you're threatening." Before anyone could process his warning, Drake reached across the table and grabbed Elena's wrist, his grip tight enough to bruise. "Time for that conversation," he said. Elena looked down at his hand, then raised her eyes to meet his gaze directly. For just a moment, something shifted in her expression. Not fear, not anger, but the cold assessment that belongs in operating rooms and combat zones. "You have 3 seconds to remove your hand," she said quietly. Drake's laugh contained not a trace of humor. "Or what? You'll call the cops? Local sheriff and the Iron Serpents have a very understanding relationship. Deputy Chief Anderson appreciates our contributions to community safety." 2 seconds, Elena continued, as if he hadn't spoken. Around the cafe, smart patrons began gathering their belongings and moving toward exits, understanding that whatever happened next would be violent enough to endanger anyone who remained nearby. 1 second. Drake's grip tightened, knuckles going white with applied pressure. His crew had drawn closer, forming a tight circle that blocked any view of the booth from remaining diners. Whatever they planned to do next, they wanted privacy for it. "Time's up," Drake announced, beginning to pull her from her seat with enough force to make resistance seem futile. What happened next would be described differently by every witness present, but all accounts agreed on the fundamental impossibility of what they observed. The 3 seconds expired with the precision of a countdown reaching 0. Elena's response unfolded with mechanical efficiency that spoke to thousands of hours of training drilled into muscle memory until conscious thought became unnecessary. Her free hand moved in a short, sharp arc that intercepted Drake's wrist at exactly the pressure point where nerve clusters create maximum pain with minimal force. The technique required surgical precision rather than brute strength. Drake's grip released involuntarily as his nervous system overrode conscious control, his hand opening despite every instinct screaming at him to maintain his hold. Before he could process what happened, Elena had twisted free and repositioned herself with fluid grace that belonged in combat zones rather than roadside cafes. "Self-defense protocols engaged," she announced, in a voice that had shed every trace of civilian politeness. "Minimal necessary force authorized." Crusher lunged forward with the confidence of someone who had never encountered an opponent his size and strength couldn't overwhelm. His massive hands reached for her shoulders, intending to demonstrate exactly how helpless she really was. Elena was no longer where his hands expected to find her. She had shifted position with minimal effort, using his momentum to redirect his attack into empty air, while simultaneously delivering a precise elbow strike to his solar plexus. The blow landed with surgical accuracy, targeting the nerve cluster that controls diaphragm function. Crusher dropped to his knees, gasping like a landed fish, his face turning purple as his respiratory system struggled to remember how to function. 43 seconds remaining, Elena observed with clinical detachment. Axel and Snake exchanged glances that communicated volumes about their suddenly revised tactical assessment. They attacked simultaneously, thinking coordinated assault would succeed where individual effort failed. Axel swung a heavy right cross intended to connect with her temple, while Snake attempted to grapple her from behind. Elena read their coordination instantly, recognizing the attack pattern and calculating her response before either man completed his first movement. She ducked beneath Axel's punch with minimal effort, simultaneously grabbing his extended arm and using his forward momentum to redirect him directly into Snake's approaching tackle. The collision produced a sound like bowling balls striking pins, both men tangling together in a heap of confused limbs and frustrated aggression. 28 seconds remaining, she continued, her breathing showing no signs of exertion despite having neutralized 3 opponents in rapid succession. Ghost, the prison veteran who supposedly earned his nickname through creative violence, produced a folding knife from his jacket pocket. The blade snicked open with practiced ease, chrome steel reflecting fluorescent lighting as he advanced. "Let's see how tough you are when the odds even up," he snarled, holding the knife in reverse grip that demonstrated actual familiarity with blade combat. Elena's response revealed exactly why Force Recon Marines receive extensive training in weapons disarmament. She stepped inside Ghost's attack range with precise timing, her left hand intercepting his knife arm, while her right delivered a focused strike to the pressure point controlling grip strength. The blade clattered across linoleum flooring, spinning to a stop beneath an empty table. Before Ghost could process the loss of his weapon, Elena had applied a joint lock that sent him to the floor beside his discarded knife. 11 seconds remaining, she announced, turning her attention to Drake, who had been backing toward the entrance, while his crew absorbed the brunt of her counterattack. The gang leader's face had gone pale as he processed the systematic destruction of his supposedly intimidating organization. 4 men who entered as predators now occupied various positions on the floor, groaning and struggling to recover from techniques they never saw coming. "This isn't over," Drake threatened, though his voice lacked earlier confidence. "You have no idea what kind of trouble you just bought yourself." "Actually, I have a very clear idea," Elena replied with calm certainty. "You're a small-time criminal who preys on civilians because you lack courage to face anyone capable of fighting back. Your organization exists through intimidation and corruption, both of which become meaningless when confronted with actual competence." She glanced at the analog clock above the counter, noting elapsed time with professional interest. 47 seconds total. I'm definitely getting slower with age. The casual observation emphasized just how completely she had dominated what should have been overwhelming numerical disadvantage. 4 trained fighters neutralized in under 50 seconds, using techniques so efficient she barely broke a sweat. General Chambers approached from his booth, his weathered face showing a mixture of pride and concern as he surveyed the aftermath. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in the tone of someone accustomed to addressing large groups, "allow me to properly introduce Captain Elena Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps, Force Recon Division." He produced his phone, holding it so the screen was visible to everyone present. The display showed an official military photograph of Elena in dress blues, her chest decorated with ribbons that spoke to achievements most people could only imagine. "Medal of Honor, recipient for actions during Operation Desert Falcon, Afghanistan, 2020, Chambers continued, his voice carrying the reverence reserved for genuine heroes. Bronze Star with Valor Device, Purple Heart with Oak Leaf Cluster, Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Combat V device. Each award fell into silence like stones into still water, their impact rippling through the assembled crowd as the full scope of Elena's military service became clear. Operation Desert Falcon was classified, Chambers explained, but I can tell you that Captain Rodriguez spent 72 hours behind enemy lines, cut off from support, protecting wounded Marines until extraction became possible. She held off an entire enemy company with minimal ammunition and improvised weapons, saving 11 lives in the process. The revelation transformed everything about how the evening's events would be remembered. What appeared to be random confrontation between bikers and a civilian was revealed as the moment when 5 criminals made the catastrophic error of threatening someone whose training had prepared her for situations far more dangerous than anything they could imagine. Outside the cafe, the sound of approaching sirens grew audible, multiple vehicles converging with obvious urgency. But these were not the corrupt local authorities that Drake expected to protect his organization's activities. Chambers' phone calls had reached levels of government that operated far above small-town corruption. The first vehicle through the parking lot belonged to the state police, followed closely by unmarked federal sedans that disgorged agents wearing FBI windbreakers and expressions of professional determination. "Captain Rodriguez," said the lead FBI agent as he entered the cafe. "Agent Patterson, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We received a priority notification about a potential threat to military personnel." Elena nodded acknowledgement while maintaining visual contact with the still groaning bikers scattered around the floor. "Situation contained, Agent Patterson. 5 subjects attempted extortion and assault. Local law enforcement may be compromised based on statements made during the confrontation." Her report was delivered in clipped professional tone of someone accustomed to briefing superior officers, each sentence containing maximum information with minimum elaboration. "We'll need full statements from everyone present," Patterson said, gesturing toward the cafe's other patrons. "This appears connected to a broader investigation into organized crime activity and police corruption in the region." As federal agents began processing the scene and taking witness statements, the true scope of the Iron Serpent's criminal enterprise became apparent. What began as harassment of a single veteran had exposed a protection racket that had been terrorizing local businesses for years, enabled by corrupt law enforcement officials who received regular payments for looking the other way. Betty Crawford emerged from behind the counter, where she had been cowering throughout the confrontation, tears streaming down her face as she approached Elena with obvious gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "They've been bleeding us dry for 3 years, taking money we needed for repairs and supplies, threatening to burn the place down if we didn't pay. Nobody would help us because they owned the sheriff's department." Her words were echoed by other business owners who arrived as news of the arrests spread through the community. Shop owners, restaurant managers, and service providers emerged from years of enforced silence to testify about systematic extortion that had crippled the local economy while enriching criminals and their corrupt protectors. The investigation that followed would ultimately result in 16 federal indictments, the dissolution of the Iron Serpent's organization, and the removal of 7 law enforcement officials who had been receiving regular payments to ignore criminal activity. The protection racket that had operated with impunity for years crumbled in a single evening because 5 men made the mistake of threatening someone whose training had prepared her for exactly this kind of confrontation. But the most significant transformation occurred in Eleanor herself. For 2 years, she had lived in anonymity, hiding from a military identity that carried too many painful memories and unwanted obligations. The confrontation at Betty's roadside cafe forced her to acknowledge that some aspects of identity cannot be permanently suppressed, that the skills and values learned during military service represent integral parts of who she has become. Over the following weeks, as federal prosecutors built their cases and corrupt officials faced justice, Elena found herself at the center of a community grateful for her intervention, but uncertain about her intentions. The woman who had been a mysterious stranger eating alone had been revealed as someone whose presence represented safety and competence in a world that often provides neither. The decision to remain in town rather than disappearing again came gradually, influenced by daily interactions that demonstrated how much her presence meant to people who had lived under threat for too long. Business owners nodded respectfully when she passed on the street. Children waved from school bus windows. Veterans of previous wars sought her out to share stories and find understanding from someone who had walked similar paths. General Chambers became her advocate and advisor, connecting her with resources and opportunities that made civilian reintegration possible without requiring her to abandon the values that defined her military service. Through his network of military contacts, she learned about federal programs designed to help veterans transition their leadership skills to civilian applications. The decision to open the Rodriguez Veteran Center grew from conversations with other former military personnel who had struggled with their own transitions from service to civilian life. The facility, housed in a renovated building donated by grateful business owners, provides counseling, job placement assistance, and peer support for veterans dealing with combat trauma and adjustment difficulties. Elena's first client was a young Marine recently returned from deployment, his eyes carrying the same hollow expression she remembered from her own mirror during the dark months following her medical discharge. Their conversation took place in a conference room decorated with photographs of local veterans, a reminder that service continues long after uniforms are put away for the final time. "It gets better," she told him, her voice carrying the authority of someone who has navigated the transition from warrior to civilian and found purpose on both sides of the divide. "The skills that kept you alive over there can be adapted to keep other people safe over here. Service doesn't end when you take off the uniform, it just changes form." Through the conference room window, Main Street stretched in both directions, lined with businesses that operated without fear for the first time in years. The community had been transformed by a single evening's violence, but more importantly, by the recognition that heroes often hide in plain sight, waiting for circumstances that require them to step forward and accept responsibilities they never sought but cannot abandon. Elena Rodriguez, Captain, United States Marine Corps, Medal of Honor recipient, had finally found her way home, not to a place, but to a purpose that honored both her military service and her civilian aspirations, serving those who served, and proving that the best battles are often fought not with weapons, but with compassion, competence, and the willingness to stand up when standing up matters most.